Wednesday evening. It is April 29th, 2026. April is almost in the can. Welcome back to Direct Line. Our co-host Jackie Saxton is still doing research. I hear now she's doing research at a hairstylist today. She is back on dry land now. Our host tonight is Mark Unkefer, and our special co-host is David Shepard. And our honored guest tonight is the next Attorney General of the great state of Maryland, Jim Rutledge. Take it away, guys.
Well, welcome, and welcome, Dave. Welcome, Jim. And it's great to have you on, Jim. You're running unopposed in the Republican primary for Attorney General, so you're actually in a position to kind of focus on the November race from scratch. Could you just explain for folks why are you running for Attorney General? What's your thinking about what the race entails?
Well, yeah, I'm running for Attorney General because I genuinely love the state of Maryland. I have deep roots in this state, and I've learned to love the people of Maryland over my 40 years of law practice. I really feel that it's important at this point in time in Maryland, as I look at our challenges, our public safety issues, crime, continuing problems with defending the Chesapeake Bay, that now is the time to focus on Maryland for the Attorney General's office, and really let's get the partisan politics out of this office. We need a leader in the Attorney General's office that's a very experienced attorney. I am that attorney, someone devoted to the rule of law. That is who I am. And I do not think that the current occupant is focused on that. He's distracted with national level political battles that aren't doing much for the people of Maryland, and we're suffering. So I was happy to step into the opportunity to take on this battle, and that's what I'm doing.
So one of the things that's interesting is understanding the role of the Attorney General. We know it's the chief lawyer in Maryland, but can you kind of elaborate on what its actual responsibility, the office's responsibility is?
Yeah, the office of the Attorney General has, I'll just put it this way, there's two sides of it. One side is the office of the Attorney General is the lawyer for the state agencies, the lawyer for the governor's office when they need an attorney, is available to provide advice and counsel to the General Assembly on request. So there is a traditional big law firm type of role there of hiring, mentoring, and making sure that good attorneys are in the Assistant Attorney General position. The other side of the Attorney General's office has to do with the policies that are led or entrusted to the Attorney General to really determine. And one of the chief roles of the Attorney General is to provide backup and support for our state's attorneys' offices. They handle all of the appeals for every single prosecutor across Maryland. But also the Attorney General is in charge of the organized crime division for the entire state. And that is a very important role here at this time when we've got crime proliferating across Maryland, gang problems. And the Attorney General is in charge of that unit and can take over the prosecution of organized crime matters on the state level on the request of any state's attorney. So that is a big role. The other major role entrusted to the Attorney General is the prosecution of crimes relating to our natural resources, which obviously include clean water and the Chesapeake Bay. And the Attorney General has exclusive jurisdiction in that area, not the state's attorney. So if, for example, if there is criminal negligence that is a violation of our criminal statutes in Maryland, that's dumping pollution into our rivers, our tributaries in the Chesapeake Bay or our water system, the Attorney General can convene at his discretion, can convene a grand jury and conduct an investigation and subpoena witnesses for that. It's something I'm very interested in seeing, the focus on the natural resources and Chesapeake Bay defense step into a more proactive role. And the third area that a lot of people are familiar with would be if they get scammed they may call the Attorney General's office and complain to the Consumer Protection Division. The Attorney General of Maryland is completely in charge of that unit. And what I want to do with that unit is I want to take it from a reactive receiving complaints unit and take advantage of one of the statutory authorities to initiate investigations to proactively pursue cyber predators. So there's a taste of it, Mark. There's a number of other aspects to it. The Attorney General, if I could just touch on this one point, has been entrusted by the General Assembly with the sole authority to make the sole decision as to if and when to sue the federal government or pursue even civil or criminal action against the federal government for something the federal government does or something the federal government fails to do. And the catalog of the authority of the Attorney General is sweeping. And in many ways, in my 40 years of legal experience, when you look at that statute, it is breathtaking, frankly, the amount of authority entrusted to the Attorney General. The governor can't tell the Attorney General to sue or not to sue. No one has any oversight over that. And so the people are electing one person who will decide what's in the best interest of Marylanders as to when to fight the federal government or not. That is a very significant authority.
Yep. Dave?
Well, Jim, tell us a little about your background in terms of your background that may help you make a very good Attorney General.
Well, it was 40 years ago this month that I graduated from Maryland Law School with honors. I was right up at the top of the class. I was admitted to a special honor society called the Order of the Coif. I was co-chair on the Moot Court Board, and I had been a special master for the Orphans Court of Baltimore City, appointed to that position while I was still in law school, and had been in the poverty law clinic where I tried and won my first case right in downtown Baltimore in the district court on behalf of a tenant that was living in horrible conditions. And to this day, that's still one of the sweetest victories I've ever had. That was the beginning point of my career, and I've had a long, diverse career with some of the top firms in Maryland and in Georgia. I'm licensed in both states, but of my 40-year career, I've practiced law actively in Maryland. 30 of those 40 years, I spent a decade with a national level law firm I started with in Atlanta, and then I was down in South Georgia. And that's where I tried many, many high-level criminal cases. I was a felony prosecutor, a juvenile prosecutor. At times, I was a criminal defense attorney in federal court. I've argued cases before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, the Georgia Supreme Court. In Maryland, I was with a top law firm doing a wide variety of work, from product liability to fiduciary duty breaches, fraud. In both states, I've worked on conspiracy matters. So it has been a long and diverse career. I love the practice of law, and I think that gives me a heart for the people. And my goal being, David, that I would like to be the attorney for the people, not for the party. I think that my opponent's career is in sharp contrast to mine. He has, frankly, not a lot of actual legal practice experience in his years. And even though we graduated from high school in the same year, 1979, he was on Long Island, and I was at North Hartford High School coming off of the farm. And it took him a while to come around to go to law school. And then after he did, it wasn't long before he launched his political career. So basically, I think it's time for Marylanders to be able to elect the independent office of the Attorney General to represent Marylanders' interests and not be, just politically driven.
So why don't you expand a little bit on how that vision that you have differs from the incumbent?
Yeah, well, the incumbent, its policies, for example, he has committed so many resources of the office to repeatedly either sue the federal government, sue different agencies, sue the president, sue this branch of the federal government, or file what are called intervening briefs in other cases that are pending. So it's the numbers are extraordinary, really, just because Anthony Brown's in his first term as Attorney General and has already been involved in, I think it's over 90 federal cases. That is a focus that he makes a decision based on national level politics on what is appealing to the nationally oriented Democrat Party versus what's happening in Maryland. So you can't do two things at once. You know, you can't, in law, you have to have priorities. He's got a big office, but the commitment of the resources and the hard-earned money of Marylanders to engage in lawsuits that, you know, a dozen other or more attorney generals in the United States are also suing. Why does Maryland have to jump on the bandwagon on every single suit? If Massachusetts sues the federal government, why do we have to jump on it? Don't they have an able attorney general's office? If California attorney general sues the federal government, their budget's humongous compared to ours in Maryland. Why are we jumping on? We're jumping on, in my opinion, because of the misguided priorities of a politically oriented attorney general. I'm looking around Maryland and I'm seeing people as I go around Maryland, my clients long before I decided to run, and people are afraid of the growth of organized crime, which is gangs, small gangs, large gangs, mid-sized gangs that are Maryland-based gangs that the federal government's not going to intervene in, and they recruit juveniles to commit the underlying crimes, and they profit off the juveniles. Our gang statute's specifically designed to address that, and the attorney general is the one that can build that office and do it. But that's a different priority. So my priority is coming from representing people and representing Marylanders and really caring about their daily lives. What's happening in your life today? Are you making a decision not to go somewhere because you've heard there's carjackings? Are you making a decision to maybe think about leaving Maryland because you don't think that Maryland government's looking out for you and your family? That's crucial. And so all I can say, Mark and David, is that when I compare the record of what has Anthony Brown done since he's been Attorney General, and what does that reflect? He has pursued politically based actions, committed our resources to that in a heavy way, not just an occasional suit. It is a constant stream of suits that continues to this day. And that is a big difference. And I think that, in my view, and I think people would agree with this, if a person has just spent 6 years in Washington, D.C. as a congressman, and now they're going to become the head lawyer of the most influential law firm in the state of Maryland, the Attorney General's office, what are they going to bring with them? They're going to bring with them a Washington, D.C. mentality, which is political fight. We must fight the partisanship battle. Marylanders, we need to come together. That's what we need to do. We have smart people. We have resources. We have great judges. We have great prosecutors across this state, both Democrat and Republicans. These people are putting their life on the line for justice in Maryland. And I think that the Attorney General ought to be right there with them and not distracted with Washington.
It reminds me of, you remember with Trump in this first term, all the lawsuits that Maryland joined. One was an emoluments clause case where they tried to sue Trump, and it went nowhere really. But I guess those are sort of the political type of lawsuits or the politics that the Attorney General plays.
Yeah, David, the breadth of the subject matter that has been covered in these lawsuits, it's across the board. It's been everything from suing the federal government because of downsizing of the federal workforce to try to help force the federal government to keep Marylanders on payroll, to we're going to sue the federal government because we don't want them to build an ICE facility in Maryland, while the constituents, what I've heard from even in my practice, is people, my neighbor or my brother or my cousin has been picked up by ICE and they didn't have a criminal record. They're not here lawfully, but they're not like the criminal ICE, target, but they got collaterally picked up. And where are they? Well, they're in Mississippi. Why? There is no ICE detention facility in Maryland. When I did a lot of criminal defense work in the federal courts down south, it makes a difference where the attorney can go to meet with and talk to their client. So if you think about it, common sense would be if we have an ICE facility in Maryland, that will make it much easier for the family members of the person who's in detention to A, visit them, and B, for their attorney to be able to go and see them. And right now, with no ICE facility, what's the alternative? So politically, the focus is stop the ICE facilities to make a statement against ICE. That does not take into account adequately, in my view, the human side of it. If a person's taken into detention and they're being processed because they're not here lawfully, can their family come see them? Can the attorney access them? So these policies are against something I learned at the Maryland Law Clinic. As the poverty clinic, we learned, and I believe, that access to justice for the accused, access to justice for the people who are disadvantaged in society, requires access to lawyers. It's a fundamental. Access to lawyers. Who in Maryland can get a lawyer in Mississippi to intervene or see or visit? How can these people even afford to see somebody? Maybe somebody's been picked up and the federal government's not going to hold them long term, but 3 months out of a job away from your family, that is an impact. And I'm not defending the idea that we should have open borders. I don't believe in open borders. But what I am saying is the Attorney General's focus is on stop every single ICE facility at any opportunity in the state of Maryland. What does that mean? We want to have ICE facilities in the state of Maryland for some time. And how does that impact Marylanders who may be here lawfully, but a relative is not? And they're not necessarily a criminal. They could be working their tails off on some job here, paying taxes and everything. And they can't see them. So that's an example, I think, David, of an example where that's a political decision. And that's a political decision where the marching orders across America for the Democrat attorney generals is to fight the federal government, fight ICE and at every turn, and then fight every decision made by the federal government. Whatever, and that sole decision's in the hands of one person, and that person is right now Anthony Brown, who has been largely a political, character. He's.
So it's interesting. Your perspective, it reflects, I guess, the background that you've had as, an attorney working with individual clients, which is different than what Anthony Brown has had, which is you appreciate the perspective of defendants or incarcerated people want to be close to their families, close to their lawyers, as opposed to being separated and moved to a completely different jurisdiction.
Yeah,
are there other examples where you think your personal background ends up informing a different perspective on being Attorney General?
Well, there's no substitute for being a felony prosecutor. There's no substitute for meeting with the families of victims who, I handle cases where, a lady was shot at point blank range, blew her upper body off of her with a 12 gauge shotgun at point blank range, and have to meet with those victims as we get ready, in prosecuting that guy, and to meet with those victims, those family members, and say, look, we're going to have to put this photograph in evidence. I don't even want to show you this photograph. I'm not going to do it. You've got a right to come to court. We're going to put it up. I'm thinking maybe, Mom, you probably don't want to see what your daughter looks like in that situation. And to actually understand what the victims are going through. That was just one example that really stuck out to me when I was prosecuting that case. And the other one that really stuck out was to understand the vulnerability of our youth for sexual crimes. I personally lead prosecutor, tried the case to verdict of a man that serially molested 6 little girls from the ages of around 5 to 8 in his neighborhood. And he said he wasn't guilty. I proved he was guilty. The jury agreed with that. I had to prepare those little girls to testify in court and face the monster that did this to them. And when you do that, it changes you. It changes you viscerally towards an orientation to always be sensitive to the victims. So I've done both sides of the criminal law, both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, because I believe in the rule of law. I believe in the system. I've never had a problem either being the prosecutor or the defense attorney, because I've trusted our great system of due process. I respect that rule of law very, very much. That perspective is required, I believe, when one of the assistant attorney generals might ask, well, we handled an appeal, there was a conviction, and there was a case actually in Harford County where there was a murder conviction. The defense appealed it fairly recently. The defense attorneys won the appeal at the first level of the appellate court of Maryland. The state's attorney who tried the case asked that appellate assistant attorney general to that was a bad ruling at the appeals court, take it to the Supreme Court of Maryland. They were absolutely convinced that the Supreme Court of Maryland would have sustained the conviction. In that situation, only one person in Maryland can authorize the appeal to the Supreme Court, and that is the Attorney General of Maryland. And Anthony Brown refused to pursue that case, to the Supreme Court of Georgia and make sure that hard-fought conviction stood of a murder in Harford County. Now, in my mind, based on my experience, I cannot possibly fathom what in the world was the Attorney General thinking not to take that case to the Supreme Court of Maryland, where we have some of the finest minds, some of the finest judges appointed by both Democrats and Republicans that sit on our Supreme Court. They are some of the best judges in America, and they would get the decision right and would have sustained that conviction. Because I know that the experienced prosecutor that handled that case in Harford County is not a person that blows smoke, right down the line on the law all the way. So that is a complete contrast to how I would have been paying attention to that. See, I care about supporting those states' attorneys, whether they're in Dorchester County, whether it's Ivan Bates in Baltimore City, whether it's Allison Healy in Harford County. I'm going to back them up. I'm not going to have my office say, we lost the first round, because when you practice law as long as I have and fought a lot of battles, you learn one thing: getting your teeth kicked in the first or second round. Get used to it. It's going to happen. What matters is sticking with it and prevailing. It's like wrestling. You've got 3 periods, and if you've got a chance to reverse and pin that person in the last 10 seconds, do it. Do not quit. And I do not want our prosecutors who do not want to quit have a person in charge of the appellate case like Anthony Brown who's going to quit. He quit on that case. You can't do that. Marylanders need justice for people who are murdering people. It blows my mind. I don't know why. Maybe he'll have a debate with me one day. Maybe he will come out and tell the people of Maryland, oh, I was too busy suing the federal government or meeting with the Attorney General of Oregon about the next thing we were going to do to Washington, D.C., and I let it slide. And the victims, my sister was murdered. I know firsthand what the pain is and what being a survivor of a murder in a family brings. And for the people who were left behind of the person that was murdered in that case, I just would challenge the Attorney General to meet with them in person and you tell them why you let it slide.
You talked before. You mentioned the role that the Attorney General's office can have in gang prosecutions,
yes,
and how it can work with the individual states' attorneys. Could you explain a little bit about how that could work and what the impact of that could be?
Sure. The Attorney General's office has the organized crime unit. So at first, I need to make it very clear. Most folks, understandably, when they think of organized crime, might think of the Cosa Nostra, it's going to, or Little Italy, it's going to be the mafia, or it's going to be the cartels. And, you've got the FBI handling the case, and then they make the case, and the U.S. attorney takes the case, and they come out in the Baltimore Sun and say, oh, the U.S. attorney just got a conviction or indictment in all these cases. What we need to understand as Marylanders is that there's a big difference between federal jurisdiction on gangs and state jurisdiction. Not all gangs are going to interest the FBI in pursuing. The FBI has limited resources, and they only take the organized crime, racketeering cases, the gang cases, where they feel like they've got a really strong route to get way up the chain of the level of international gang lordship, the bosses. Okay. They want big cases, number one. Number two, the U.S. Attorney's Office federally only takes and indicts cases that they are very, very confident they will get a conviction in. And in some U.S. Attorney's Office, the standard is their record is way over a 90% conviction rate in most U.S. attorney's offices across America. So what that means is there's a lot of gang activity in Maryland that A, the FBI is not going to assume investigation, and B, the U.S. Attorney's Office is not going to indict and prosecute. So that leaves all the rest of the gangs under the radar that have to be prosecuted by our state's attorneys. So the law set up in Maryland, so the Attorney General's office forms and has an organized crime gang unit for the Maryland gangs, for any gang, anything that fits the definition of that organized crime conspiracy. The state's attorney's offices, we have counties in this state where it is hard to recruit a lawyer to even run for state's attorney. Now, where I'm based out of, which is Harford County and Baltimore County, we have two fabulous state's attorney's offices with highly qualified prosecutors that are very able of handling a great deal of sophisticated criminal cases. Allison Healy tried the case against the murderer of Rachel Morin. Got the conviction in short order against that monster. Now, but you go down on the Eastern Shore, you get smaller counties, Caroline, Dorchester, those state's attorney's offices, because of the size and the budgets of those counties, cannot robustly pursue a sophisticated racketeering prosecution. That takes a certain level of understanding of that subtleties of the conspiracy law to do that. So what I'm opening up is saying, look, I want the Maryland Attorney General's office to have the strongest organized crime unit of any state in America. I want the best prosecutors, and I want the best relationships with all of our state's attorneys, no matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And I want them to know it's an open door with my office. If you've got something going on and you know, hey, this is bigger than just a one-off. This is a pattern. This is a group that's, working in our jurisdiction, and we want to see whether or not we can do the bigger prosecution. It's an open door in my office. Come on down. We'll come to you. We're going to give you the help you need to do that. We're going to take all this energy that is distracted with suing the federal government, and we're going to go after gangs in Maryland, because those gangs recruit juveniles to do their dirty deeds, thinking that the juveniles will get a pass, and thinking that the bosses in those gangs and the captains in those gangs will never be held responsible for that crime. That's not the case under Maryland law. We can prosecute and hold their feet to the fire and convict all of the adults that recruit, fund, and profit off of all of the juvenile crime going on. When juveniles jack a car and it disappears, it's not a juvenile that knew where the chop shop was. It's not a juvenile that knew how to get it out of here. It was not a juvenile that knew which containers they could count on could end up in the harbor, down the Chesapeake Bay, and boom, out of here, okay? Or on a train and be in Mexico before you know it. Juveniles don't have that. No, they're doing the dirty work. And the people that profit off of exploiting those juveniles, that's who we need to go after. So that's why, and that is really rests with the Attorney General to take a policy change, beef up that office, and say, you know what, to the state's attorneys, don't feel overwhelmed. Not at all. We've got your back, and we're going to take over. We'll take over the prosecution if you want us to. We'll do the grand jury investigations. We'll do the indictments. We'll try the case. We'll handle the appeals. We'll stick it to them.
It seems like your background's much more qualified, suitable for this job. Anthony Brown strikes me as, and I'm an outsider, as more of a politician, because remember, he ran for governor and then he ran for Congress. And so it seems that your strength would be, while, the state is a Democrat leaning state heavily, but your background is more for this job, it seems to me, as opposed to Anthony Brown.
I'm appealing directly to all Marylanders. I'm appealing to the independents, and I can understand why they're fed up with partisan politics. I can relate to that. And this is an office where independents can come up and say, hey, look, if you're sick of it, Jim Rutledge is your guy for this race, for this office, for Attorney General. So just a little more background, David, if I could, on Anthony Brown. As I mentioned, he was in high school up in Long Island, and he got he got the invitation to go to West Point, and that's fabulous. And he went to West Point. He didn't graduate from West Point. He graduated from Harvard with his 4-year degree. He transferred, and so he ended up then on his military track through the ROTC program with MIT. Because back in 79 and 80 and 81, 82, 83, some people might know that Harvard didn't have an ROTC back then. I don't know if they do have one now, but MIT was the sister ROTC. So he went through that, and then he went full-time in the military, and I give him all the credit in the world for doing that. I have a lot of relatives who've served, in the military, and I have a great deal of respect for military service and service to the country that way. But it was after that time that he went to law school after being full-time in the military. So he ended up back in law school at the Ivy League. I was at Maryland Law, Maryland Streets, Maryland Clinic. He was at the, Ivy League. And then he went from the Ivy League to Washington, D.C. and did a clerkship with the federal military court, a clerkship. Then he ended up in Prince George's County, worked with a law firm for a while, and it wasn't long until he launched his first race to become a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. And he, once elected to the House of Delegates, he got reelected and reelected and reelected. And ultimately, Martin O'Malley brought him on as his lieutenant governor, 2 terms of that. And that's when Anthony Brown decided he wanted to be governor. But so did Martin O'Malley's wife, Judge Curran, wanted to be governor. So they had a boxing match. And then in the general election, that's when Anthony Brown lost to Larry Hogan in that governor's race.
Yeah.
So Anthony Brown took a couple years there to gear up for his congressional race, and then won that and won 2 others. So a total of 3 congressional terms, and then left a very safe seat in Congress in Prince George's County. He left that for the Attorney General's office. So I can only speculate. That's purely a political move. Maryland's a state where if you get a Steny Hoyer, he stays.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Forever.
So you were referring to.
It's not the kind of state where if a Democrat's got a safe seat in Congress that they just we're going to forget about seniority and the 6 years in, and we're going to forget about the power of the committee structure in Washington. We'll take another freshman congressman. So they took another freshman congressman, and Anthony Brown became Attorney General. So this is his whole mentality. This is his whole experiential level. As no matter what his motives are personally, you can't get away from your experiences in life. It is like, I can't get away from my farm roots. I got up early in the morning, fed the cows, rode with my dad in his large animal veterinary practice, helped pull pieces of calves out of cows to save cows' lives in the middle of the night when I was like a kid. And that ingrained in me 2 things. 1, a strong work ethic, and 2, an appreciation for nature and a love of nature. So that's just me. So we all live lives. And so I'm just asking the people of Maryland, compare being a career lawyer that I am to a career politician, and where the focus is and how that would affect someone's judgment calls.
So tell me how your campaign is doing. What's been the reaction so far that you've got as you've been out talking to Marylanders?
Well, it's been good. We really got rolling on this just 8 weeks ago, and it was March 3rd actually that I went and filed and accepted the invitation to step up for this. And in the past 8 weeks, it's really taken off. I've been around the state building teams, many volunteers coming forward throughout the state, and I have great advisors. And it's encouraging. It's really, what's great, Mark, is the different people in Maryland and where they are and their perspectives. Like what I learned when I was at a Latino Hispanic outreach, what I learned from being out in Cecil County and down in St. Mary's County and out in Boonesboro, where I gave a speech just last week. So from the fields, the Antietam Baton fields, to Cecil County, to Southern Maryland and St. Mary's, and then to Prince George's County and Beltsville on Saturday afternoon. That was fantastic. I was well received by an organization that called themselves the African Diaspora, and they are folks that their home countries are African nations, whether it's Ivory Coast or Nigeria or Kenya. And they chose Maryland, came to Maryland for a lot of different reasons, came here legally, have become citizens, and are raising their families in the either Prince George's County area or Montgomery County. And it was a wonderful group of people who were highly motivated to elect a representative in the Attorney General's office is going to hold to the rule of law and care about these issues that are kitchen table issues like crime and the internet with cyber predators. Those are my 2-1-2 punch, platforms, is the crime, combating the crime, and combating cyber predators. That is something that the background that they came from in their nations in Africa and came here, this is one of the things they love about Maryland. It's a land of opportunity for them, and they want to see that opportunity grow with the next generation and their children. And the Latino Hispanic outreach, it was just so informative to see what motivation there is to really seize the American dream through Maryland. And they understand that peace, prosperity follow law and order. Very simple formula. Peace and prosperity depend on law and order. You have to have that environment to be able to open up a store as an entrepreneur, not get run out with vandalism or robbery. It's common sense. And so that's the great model of American law, is we have this system that is to be fair and just, impartial, and looking out for people's lives, for their homes, their jobs, their work, and giving them, the opportunity to have social mobility and prosperity. None of that happens without peace and order. Our public schools are a good example of that. So many of them, the students they're suffering intimidation or worse, or violence. There was just on the news here in the Baltimore area, highlighting a problem with, films shot on school buses where there was a big brawl and some girl got knifed. And then that carried over to a brawl outside of school. Next thing you know, there's a brawl outside of Towson Town Center on the streets of Towson, there's a melee of juveniles. When kids are in that environment, it's no wonder they can't learn. I mean, how can you concentrate if you're looking over your shoulder all the time? So these folks understand that. I trust Marylanders are starting to see that political distraction is not doing anything to make their lives better. And that's what this race is all about. And it's taken off that way. More people are getting excited, they're volunteering, they're stepping up, and we're getting out all around the state. I'll be back on the road here this weekend. We'll be in Severna Park, and then we'll be down on the Eastern Shore on Sunday. Next week, I think I'll be down in Queen Anne's County. So we're getting out there. We're spreading the message. The website's real simple, electjim.com, simplest website on the planet. And it's smart people helped me get that very quickly, and I didn't have to pay extra for it. And
So I was going to ask just a little bit. You mentioned some of the events, but can you just elaborate on the best ways to get in touch with your campaign and have a chance to meet you or get more involved in the campaign?
Yeah, the very best way and the most efficient way is just to go to the website, which is electjim.com, and on that website, we have 2 tabs at the top, one for donations and one to volunteer. And I encourage people to click the volunteer tab, whether they have time to volunteer or not, because then they're going to be able to join the team, right? Put your name, address, get your email in there, and put a little note in there. And my team looks at those, and we'll get back somebody. We will get back to you. We will get you into our, on board, whether it's you want to do something small or great. And on the donation site, there's I like to tell people that if you just look at the number of registered voters in Maryland, and you look at the number of registered voters in Maryland that have voted for, say, Larry Hogan, or back in the day, Bob Ehrlich, okay? And if 10% of them gave us $25, we instantaneously have a very nice war chest. So I'm encouraging people, don't feel like when you see the donation button, oh, I can't afford the $500 donation. You know, I'm not asking from you a $500 donation to the people. I'm $10, 25 bucks, 50 bucks. That goes a long way. You know, signs, you see these signs, they cost a little over $3 a piece. Think about that, you know, 25 bucks, 8 signs, you're up and running. You're really helping us materially.
So thank you, Jim. But I do have one last request. I'm hoping that on the campaign trail, you'll be able to get out to Masoni's.
Yes, yeah. I have not been there yet, but
Well,
I owe it to
we'll take that as a challenge for you.
We'll do a little meet and greet at Masoni's for you.
you know, Mason, they are great people. They are fantastic, you know, people. And I love those guys. And, you know, I know that I'm sure the food is mouth watering. I'm definitely gonna hit it. Yeah.
And
all right.
by the
Well,
way,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
We've really enjoyed having you on, Jim and Dave. It's been great to see you again.
Well, thank you for your gracious time with me, your questions, the good old exercise of our First Amendment rights. It just,
There you go.
Good. Well, good luck.
okay. Thank you.
good night, everyone.
Right.
Let's go down to Masoni's, where Italian cuisine